We invited 80 extra people to your wedding and sent the bill to your boss, my mail whispered. He's a multimillionaire, he won't mind. My boss is my dad. He called me laughing. At the ceremony, the officiant asked, if anyone objects? My dad stood up with the bill. The wedding ended in 4 minutes. The 94 missed calls from his family. I want you to picture the most important morning of your adult life. You've planned every detail for 14 months. You're in a tiny room that smells like hairspray and nervous energy, and your maid of honor is hot gluing a button back onto your dress because the seamstress, bless her, underestimated what stress eating does to a woman over a year-long engagement. The flowers are done. The photographer, me, Alicia, yes, I am a professional photographer who somehow did not photograph her own wedding. I see the irony. Moving on. The photography is handled by my second shooter and best friend Petra, who has approximately 47 camera bags and the energy of a Labrador. Everything, against all statistical probability, is going according to plan. And then my mother-in-law, let's call her Diane because that is her name and she has forfeited the right to a pseudonym, leans in close enough that I can smell her signature perfume, which I can only describe as magnolias dipped in entitlement, and she whispers something into my ear that makes my left eye twitch in a way it has not twitched since the 2019 incident with the deposit I will get to later. What she whispers is this. We invited 80 extra people. Don't panic. The venue can fit them. I already called. I sent the bill to your boss. He's a multimillionaire, he won't mind. It's fine. You look beautiful. Don't make a face like that. I made a face like that. I want to be precise here because precision matters and also because several people in this thread are going to ask for details. 80. Not 8. Not 18. 80 additional human beings, each of whom presumably eats food and occupies space, had been added to the guest list of my wedding. My wedding. The wedding I had planned. The wedding that had a catering contract and a seating chart that I had redone 11 times in an Excel spreadsheet I called the War document. A wedding that was, I cannot stress this enough, already at capacity. And the bill for their food, their drinks, their chairs that would need to be rented, their existence at my nuptials, had been forwarded to my employer. Who gave you his contact information? I asked. My voice was very calm. Petra later told me this calm was deeply unsettling, like the moment before a nature documentary gets bad. You gave it to me months ago, sweetheart, Diane said, and she patted my hand and I did not combust. He's a multimillionaire. He told me he supports you completely. It's fine. Yes, really. Here is what Diane did not know. Because I had never, not once in 3 years of dating her son Marcus, and 1 year of engagement, mentioned it out loud in her presence. My boss, Richard, who has a corner office and a standing desk, and a coffee machine that costs more than most used cars, and who did, in fact, describe himself as a multimillionaire in a financial disclosure I accidentally witnessed once. My boss, Richard, is my father, my dad, the man who taught me to ride a bike and cried at every single one of my school plays, including the ones where I was a tree. That Richard. The one who also happens to own the photography studio where I work, because he bought it specifically so I could run it independently without feeling like a charity case, which I did not find out until the 3rd year of working there when his accountant sent a congratulatory birthday email to the wrong address. That was a whole other thing. My dad, whom I had told Diane was my employer because, and I want to be transparent about this, I was trying to buy myself some time before the full family introduction, given everything I knew about Diane, which was extensive and concerning. My phone, which was sitting face up on the vanity table, lit up at that exact moment. Dad calling. I answered it. Alicia, said my father's voice, and I could hear that he was trying very hard not to laugh and failing completely. I just received an invoice for a wedding. Your wedding, I believe? It is itemized. There is a line item for, hold on, ambient floral arrangement upgrade, 80 additional guests, $2,400. There is also a line item for premium open bar extension. Alicia. Sweetheart, the total is $11,340. A silence. Also, he continued, and now the laughter was completely winning, the email introduces me as, let me read this exactly, Alicia's generous and successful employer whom she speaks of so fondly. I am reading this on my phone. In my car. In your venue's parking lot, because your mother made me come early to help with the centerpieces. Alicia, I need you to explain what is happening. I looked at Diane, who was adjusting her fascinator in the mirror with the serenity of a woman who has never experienced consequences. Dad, I said, don't pay anything. And could you keep the invoice, the printed one? Don't lose it. "Oh," said my father, in a voice that indicated he fully understood the assignment. "I have already printed 2 copies. I have them in a manila folder. I am wearing my good suit." That was the moment I knew my wedding would be, in the most technical sense, unforgettable. For those of you arriving by a cross post and wondering how a grown adult professional woman ends up in a bridal suite being informed that 80 strangers have been added to her wedding, and the bill sent to her father who doesn't know he's her father, welcome. Pull up a chair. There is a lot of ground to cover, and I will try to keep it moving. But there are some things you need to understand about Diane's family before the main event will make full sense. I am Alicia. I am 31 years old. I am a photographer, the kind that does weddings, yes, but also portraits, editorial work, some commercial stuff, and occasionally art projects that my dad pretends to understand when he visits the studio. I am good at my job. I am organized. I make color-coded folders. I have a backup hard drive for my backup hard drive. I plan things. I am, by any reasonable metric, a functional and responsible adult human being who pays her taxes and flosses. Marcus, my then fiancé, is also a good person. I want to be absolutely clear about this because he is not the villain of this story. Marcus is a structural engineer who builds bridges and cries at animated movies and makes excellent soup. He is kind and funny, and has, for the duration of our relationship, been slowly, gradually, incrementally drowning in the expectations of his family, while smiling and saying they mean well and it's just how they are. I say this with love and with the retrospective clarity of a woman who has had 8 months of therapy since this story ends. Diane is Marcus's mother. She is 63 years old, recently retired from a career in hospital administration, and she has weaponized her competence in ways that I genuinely find impressive. From a purely strategic standpoint, she does not ask for things, she does not request permission. She presents you with a fait accompli and then asks why you're upset about something that's already done. She is the human equivalent of a terms and conditions pop-up. Technically, you consented, but no reasonable person would have read that far. There is also Marcus's father, Gerald, who has perfected the art of not being in the room when decisions are made. Gerald is a sweet man who loves golf and has the energy of a golden retriever who has learned not to bark because it never helped. He would later become one of my favorite people. This is foreshadowing. There is Marcus's sister Bethany, who is 27 and between opportunities, which she has been since graduating college 4 years ago with a degree in communications that she describes as not quite what the market wanted. Bethany is not malicious. She is simply, and I say this as someone who tried to help her update her LinkedIn 3 separate times, adrift. She has very strong opinions about things she has no experience with, including event planning, photography, marriage, and how I should wear my hair. There is Diane's mother, Grandma Rosemary, who is 81 and pretends to be slightly more confused than she is, which is a level of long game strategy I genuinely respect. Rosemary was not involved in the wedding planning in the same way that a chess grandmaster is not involved in a game they are currently winning. And then there is Uncle Dennis, Diane's brother, who lives 45 minutes away in a house he is purchasing from his mother, at a rate of approximately whenever per month. And who has informed me on 3 separate occasions that he used to know people in photography in a way that implies I should be grateful for information I never received. I met Marcus's family 8 months into our relationship. By month 9, Diane had opinions about my apartment. By month 10, she had introduced me to her hairdresser, just so you know who to call. By month 11, she had forwarded me an article about how long engagements lead to second guessing, despite the fact that we were not yet engaged. By month 12, she had sent me a recipe for a casserole that she mentioned approximately 3 times, had been a hit at Marcus's ex-girlfriend's mother's birthday. I have never made the casserole. I will never make the casserole. The casserole is a power play, and I recognized it immediately. When Marcus proposed, beautifully, genuinely, in a way that made me cry and made Petra, who was hiding behind a parked van to document it at my request, also cry. I was happy. I was so genuinely, completely happy that for approximately 3 weeks, I allowed myself to believe that the wedding planning would be normal. It was not normal. Within 48 hours of our engagement, Diane had sent me a guest list. Her guest list, for my wedding. It contained 112 names. Marcus and I had discussed, together over pasta, that we wanted a small wedding. 60 people, maybe 70. People we actually knew and loved. A real day, not a production. Diane's list included, and I am not embellishing, her dentist, he's practically family, a woman named Patricia, who had apparently been a neighbor in 1987. She'd be hurt not to be invited. Someone listed only as the Kowalski twins, with no further context. And Gerald's former business partner whom Marcus had never met, and from whom Gerald had been estranged for 6 years, I handled this diplomatically. I said very gently that Marcus and I would look through the list together and incorporate what we could within our venue's capacity. Diane said, "Of course, I understand completely," in a tone that absolutely did not mean that she understood or would comply. We went back and forth about the guest list for 11 months. 11 months! I have the emails. I have the texts. I have one voice memo I accidentally recorded during a phone call where Diane explains for 6 minutes why the Kowalski twins specifically need to be there. I do not know what the Kowalski twins did to earn this level of advocacy. I have never found out. I am at peace with not knowing. The venue we chose held 140 people at a stretch. We had agreed on 122 guests, a compromise that had taken again 11 months and had left me feeling like a UN negotiator with worse catering. The catering contract was signed. The seating chart was done. We were 2 weeks from the wedding. And somewhere in those last 2 weeks, Diane had quietly, methodically contacted the venue and the caterer separately. Not to change the booking, because I was the contract holder, but to ask informational questions about capacity and cost for additional guests. And then she had, using the contact information I had given her early in the planning process for emergencies, emailed my father's studio, my boss, with an invoice and a charming breezy message explaining that the bride's generous employer would surely want to contribute to the joy of the occasion. The invoice, as my father later told me between fits of completely uncontrolled laughter, was professional. It had a header, it had line items, it had a suggested payment method. It had at the bottom a note that said this gesture would mean so much to Alicia and Marcus on their special day. My father, for the record, is not a man who is easily startled. He has run a business for 30 years. He has negotiated contracts and dealt with difficult clients, and once famously in our family talked a disgruntled competitor out of a lawsuit with a bottle of scotch and a 4-hour dinner. But he told me later that he sat in his car in that parking lot for a full minute just reading the invoice. And that it was only the fact that he was already at the venue, having arrived early because my mother asked him to help with centerpieces, that stopped him from getting on a plane to somewhere quiet and never returning. Instead, he put the invoice in a manila folder, and he went inside. And he waited. I know the exact time because Petra had her camera rolling. She caught all of it. I have watched the footage approximately 40 times. It remains the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen, and I have photographed 63 weddings. Let me set the scene for you, because as a photographer I am constitutionally incapable of not setting scenes. The ceremony venue was a converted manor house outside the city, the kind of place with stone walls and climbing wisteria and tall windows that fill with afternoon light in a way that makes even bad relationships look cinematic. We had rented the main hall, which had a central aisle flanked by wooden chairs and a small raised dais where the officiant would stand. It was genuinely beautiful. I had scouted it twice. I knew exactly where the light would fall at 3 p.m., and I had quietly, professionally, given Petra a shot list. When I tell you that 80 extra people had been added, I need you to understand what that looked like in physical space. The main hall had been set up for 122 guests, which was already snug but manageable. Diane's people. The extras, whom I was now mentally referring to collectively as the interlopers, had been seated by Diane herself, who had arrived 2 hours early to help with setup. The venue staff, to their credit, had called me. I had not had my phone on me at the time because I was in hair and makeup. Diane had told them, when they raised concerns, that everything was sorted with the bride. It was not sorted. There were chairs in the aisle. There were people standing along the back wall. There were, according to Petra's later account, 3 small children who had been given absolutely nothing to do and were conducting their own investigation of the floral arrangements with their hands. The venue manager found me in the bridal suite 13 minutes before the ceremony to tell me, apologetically, that the fire code was a consideration. I told him I was aware and that I appreciated him telling me, and that things were about to become clearer. He looked at me the way people look at someone on a boat in a storm who seems very calm, which is to say, concerned, but curious. I walked down the aisle to a piece of music I had chosen 14 months before. I would like to tell you that I was serene and present and moved by the beauty of the moment. I was some of those things. I was also conducting, in the back of my mind, a silent inventory of the room. There was my mother, sitting in the front row, looking magnificent and also looking at the crowd around her with an expression that said, I have questions. There was Petra, moving like a ghost along the edges of the room with her camera. There was Marcus at the end of the aisle, who looked genuinely happy and also genuinely confused about why there were so many people, and who would later tell me he'd assumed it was a venue decision. And there, in the third row on the right, in his good suit with a manila folder resting on his knee, was my father. He caught my eye as I passed. He raised one eyebrow approximately 3 millimeters. I gave the smallest nod that has ever been given in the history of nonverbal communication. The officiant, a wonderful woman named Claire, who I had met twice and who had been nothing but professional, began the ceremony. She welcomed everyone. She said lovely things about love and commitment and the joining of families. Bethany cried immediately, which was actually quite sweet. Grandma Rosemary sat with the expression of someone watching a chess match she already knows the outcome of. Gerald looked relieved in the way that Gerald always looked relieved, quietly, privately, as though relief was something he had to ration. Diane was seated in the front row on Marcus's side, next to Gerald, and she was beaming. The beam of a woman who has executed a plan. The beam of a woman who believes the invoice has been paid and the 80 extra guests have been absorbed, and that life is proceeding according to her architecture. It was, in retrospect, an impressive display of confidence. I will give her that. We got through the opening. We got through the first reading, which my aunt delivered beautifully. We got through the part where Claire asked us to face each other, and Marcus took my hands, and he looked at me in a way that was so genuinely full of love that I almost forgot about the manila folder in the third row. Almost. And then Claire said the words, "If anyone here has cause to object to this union, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Standard, traditional. A formality, nobody objects at real weddings. Everyone knows this. It is the one moment in the ceremony that exists only in movies and as a rhetorical placeholder. There was a pause. And then, from the third row, in a single smooth motion that suggested this was something he had been quietly rehearsing since a parking lot 45 minutes ago, my father stood up. He was holding the manila folder. He opened it. He cleared his throat. "I do have something to say," said my father, in the tone of a man who has been a business owner for 30 years and is completely comfortable with a room full of people looking at him. "I am Richard. I am Alicia's father. I was introduced to the planning process of this wedding as her employer, which, to be fair, I also am, so that's not wrong. Earlier today, I received an invoice by email for $11,340 for 80 additional guests who were added to this wedding without the knowledge of the bride." Silence. Complete, total, molecular silence. My father continued, because when my father has the floor, he uses it. "The invoice was sent to me on the understanding that I am a generous and successful employer who would surely want to contribute. As the father of the bride, I find I do want to contribute, specifically to clarity. So I want to ask, in this forum with everyone present, who authorized this and what is the plan to pay for it?" He sat down. He folded the manila folder, closed. He crossed his legs. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds, which is a very long time in a room full of 202 people. Then Diane made a sound. I cannot describe it exactly. It was somewhere between a gasp and a word, and the noise a balloon makes when you let the air out too fast. It was the sound of a plan encountering reality. That's not... Richard is your father?" she said, and she was looking at me, and I looked back at her, and I said nothing, because I didn't need to say anything, because my father had just said everything, and because Claire the officiant was still standing at the dais holding her notes with the expression of a woman who has officiated 40 weddings and has never, not once, experienced anything like this, and who was clearly working out what the procedurally correct next step was. "Should I?" Claire started. "I think," said my father helpfully, "we should probably discuss the invoice before proceeding." Uncle Dennis, who was seated near the back among the interlopers and who had only learned today that his sister had forwarded a bill to the bride's boss, made a sound that I can only describe as existential. Grandma Rosemary, I later learned from my cousin who was seated next to her, whispered, "I knew this would happen," in a tone of complete satisfaction. Gerald said nothing. Gerald put his hand over his eyes. This was not a gesture of embarrassment. This was the gesture of a man who has been waiting for an external force to intervene for approximately 20 years. Marcus was still holding my hands. He looked at me, he looked at the room, he looked back at me. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. "About my dad being here." "Yes," I said. "About the 80 people. I found out this morning." He closed his eyes for a moment. He opened them. He said, to his mother's back, because she had turned around to look at the room, at the 80 extra faces, at Gerald, at Uncle Dennis. "Mom, did you send an invoice to Alicia's father for guests you added without asking?" Diane turned back around. She had recovered some composure. She was deploying what I had come to think of as the reasonable expression, The face she put on when she needed to reframe a situation as someone else's misunderstanding. "I was trying to help," she said. "The family wanted to be here. I didn't think it was a big deal." Richard, Mr. Richard. "I didn't realize this is a family matter. It became a business matter," said my father, still completely calm. "When you emailed my studio." Someone in the back row sneezed. Nobody moved. It was Petra who told me later from behind her camera, which had not stopped rolling for a single second, that the atmosphere in that room was one of the most extraordinary things she had ever witnessed. She said it felt like a nature documentary. She said she half expected a narrator. She said the sneeze was the funniest individual moment of her professional career. Claire, the officiant, who turned out to be genuinely excellent under pressure, said very gently, "Perhaps it would help if the families took a few minutes, and we can continue the ceremony once things are resolved. I'll be right here." That was, by Petra's footage timestamp, 4 minutes and 12 seconds after the objection. We did not continue the ceremony. Not that day. I want to be honest with you, because Reddit deserves honesty. Marcus and I didn't call off the wedding because of the invoice. We called off the wedding because of what happened in the next 37 minutes in the garden behind the manor house, where Diane, when confronted calmly and directly by both me, Marcus, and eventually my father, said, and I am quoting from memory, but Petra has the audio, "I don't understand why everyone is acting like I did something wrong. I did this for Marcus. Alicia's family is small and she doesn't have the connections our family has. I was helping." She said, "Alicia's family is small," to my father's face. My father, who was standing directly in front of her. My father, who had spent the past 31 years building the family she was describing as insufficient. My father said, very quietly, "I'm going to step away for a moment." And he went and stood by a rosebush and looked at it very intently for about 2 minutes, and I knew him well enough to know that this was not distress but the careful management of a response he was choosing not to give. Marcus said, "Mom, you need to stop talking." She did not stop talking. She said 3 more things that I will summarize as: 1. She had the family's best interests at heart. 2. This was being blown out of proportion. And 3. What would people think? Marcus, who had been holding my hand through all of it, looked at me, really looked at me, and then he said to his mother in the quietest and most definitive voice I had ever heard him use, "We're not doing the ceremony today. Not until there's an apology. A real one." Diane looked at him. Then at me. Then at my father by the rosebush. Then at the manor house full of 202 people who were all presumably still sitting there. And she said, "I'll apologize when people stop overreacting." Marcus said, "Okay, then we're done for today." He squeezed my hand. We walked back into the manor house together to speak to Claire and to the venue manager and to our guests. We told them, as graciously as we could, that there had been a family situation and we were rescheduling. My mother burst into tears, which was very her, and then immediately started organizing people, which was also very her. Petra followed everything with her camera, professionally but discreetly, because she is excellent at her job and because she knew, as I knew, that we would want a record. My father paid for the catering, for the 122 guests we had actually invited, out of his own pocket, without being asked, and then put the full amount on a formal invoice to Diane that he sent the following Monday. She has not paid it. It is in a drawer. It is accruing symbolic interest. The 80 extra guests were invited by Diane to a gathering at her house the following evening, which she apparently framed as a pre-wedding party, and which nobody attended except Uncle Dennis and the Kowalski twins. I don't know what she told them. I don't know who the Kowalski twins are. I may never know. This is fine. Within the next 6 hours, Marcus received 94 missed calls from various members of his extended family. 94. He counted them. He showed me the screen. We were sitting in the hotel room we had booked for our wedding night, the one with the champagne that the hotel had already put out, which we did drink, because waste is a sin. And he scrolled through the notifications and we counted them together. 94. At least 30 of them were from phone numbers we didn't recognize, which we assume were the interlopers who had Diane's number and Diane had given them Marcus's. He did not call any of them back that night. He ordered room service. He said, "I'm really sorry about my mom." I said, "I know." He said, "I think I've known for a long time that this was going to happen eventually. Some version of this." I said, "Me too." He said, "I'm glad it happened now and not in 10 years with kids involved." And reader, that is the sentence that told me more about Marcus's clarity and courage and fundamental good sense than anything that had come before it. And it is also the sentence that made me certain that what came next, which was hard, genuinely hard, was the right thing. Let me describe the first morning after the wedding. That wasn't. I woke up in a hotel room at 8:14 a.m. I made coffee using the little machine on the counter. I made it the way I like it, which is strong and with just a little of the hotel creamer. And I sat by the window and drank it in my pajamas. And nobody asked me for anything. Not one person asked me for a thing. I did not have to modify the coffee for someone else's preferences. I did not have to justify the amount of creamer. I did not have to explain why I had chosen that particular mug. I sat with that coffee for 22 minutes. It was the best 22 minutes I'd had in recent memory, which tells you a great deal about how the previous 14 months had gone. Petra texted me at 8:47 a.m. Her text said, "I have footage. All of it. I am available whenever you need it." Also, you were glowing the entire time, which is insane given what was happening. My mother texted me at 9:02 a.m. Her text said, "Alicia, call me when you can. Bring nothing. Just yourself." My father texted me at 9:15 a.m. His text said, "I have the invoice. Still laminated. Also, I am sorry about yesterday, and also not sorry about yesterday." Coffee? Marcus texted me at 9:30 a.m. He was 3 floors up. We had agreed to sleep separately because we had both needed the space, and also because we were adults who understood that a conversation of this magnitude required more than 12 hours and 1 bottle of champagne to navigate. His text said, "I called my mom this morning. She still hasn't apologized. I told her that until she does, and until we have a real conversation about what happened, I'm not available. She told me I was breaking her heart. I told her that was a conversation for her and her therapist." Marcus had, apparently, in the course of 12 hours and one very long internal reckoning, located a spine of absolutely impressive proportions. I do not take credit for this. He had been finding it for a while. The previous day had simply been the moment it became visible. I should tell you what happened to Marcus and me because you will want to know. We did not cancel the engagement. Not immediately and not permanently. What we did was take the time we had not previously taken, or rather had not been given, to have every conversation that Diane's constant involvement had prevented us from having. About boundaries. About what we each needed from a partner and from a marriage. About what family meant and what role it would play. These conversations were sometimes hard and sometimes funny, and sometimes both at once, and we had most of them over the next 3 months. In restaurants and on walks and in my apartment, which Marcus had never technically moved into, but which felt, during this period, like the most neutral and genuine territory either of us had. We did get married. 4 months later. 38 guests. My parents, his dad Gerald, Petra, a handful of friends so close they're basically family, and one colleague of Marcus's, who I'd always liked and who cried beautifully. The venue was a restaurant with a garden and good lighting, and a chef I'd photographed twice who gave us a discount because he remembered me. Claire, the officiant, came back. Because she is a professional and a hero, and also because she told me she had thought about the Manor House incident almost every day since, and wanted to see how the story ended. It ended well. It ended with Marcus saying his vows in a voice that didn't shake once, and me saying mine while holding Petra's backup camera because she had asked me to hold it briefly and I refused to give it back, because having something to do with my hands kept me from crying before the important part. It ended with my father dancing with my mother and Gerald, who had not been told whether he was invited until he called Marcus directly and asked, sobbing quietly, sitting in his car in his driveway because he didn't want Diane to hear him. Gerald dancing with everyone, including Petra, because Gerald had apparently needed 20 years and one extremely dramatic wedding that wasn't to fully come back to himself. Gerald cried 3 times. All of them were the good kind. Now, what happened to Diane? Because I know that's what some of you are here for, and I respect that, so let me give it to you fully and honestly. The 94 missed calls were the opening salvo of what I can only describe as a sustained campaign of strategic reconciliation, which Diane prosecuted with the same energy and organizational thoroughness she had applied to the original guest list. It had phases. Phase 1 was the denial phase, which lasted approximately a week and a half and consisted of Diane maintaining, to anyone who would listen, that she had done nothing wrong, and that the whole situation was a misunderstanding caused by people who were too sensitive. Uncle Dennis, who had been at the ceremony and had seen my father stand up with a manila folder, and who was the person Diane was telling this to most frequently, began responding to her versions of events with a progressively longer silence before each that he later described to Marcus as the silence of a man reconsidering several things. Phase 2 was the emissary phase, in which Diane began sending other people to communicate on her behalf. Bethany called me twice, both times opening with, "I'm not taking sides but," and both times taking sides so completely that the disclaimer was technically false. Uncle Dennis called Marcus once and said he was just checking in, and then said, "For what it's worth, I think your mother went about it wrong," and then quickly said, "I didn't say that," and then said goodbye. Grandma Rosemary sent me a card, a physical card handwritten, which arrived 9 days after the ceremony, which said in Rosemary's handwriting, "Dear Alicia, I always thought you were sensible. This confirms it. R." I have the card. It is on my fridge. Phase 3 was the recipe phase, and this is where things became genuinely, magnificently absurd. It started with Diane sending Marcus a recipe, a family recipe for a soup his grandmother used to make, with the note, "Just thought you'd like this." Then she sent another recipe 3 days later, this one for Alicia. I remember she liked the asparagus at Christmas. Then she sent a third recipe with the subject line, "Just checking you got the last one." Then a fourth recipe. Then she called Marcus to ask if he'd received the recipes, and when he said yes, she asked if Alicia had tried them. And when he said he didn't know, she said, "Can you ask her? I just want to know if she liked them." I did not make the recipes. I did, however, appreciate them in a technical sense. Because they were objectively good recipes, and because the escalating frequency, we eventually counted 11 recipe emails in 16 days, had a quality of desperation that I found genuinely moving. In the same way that watching a chess player who is losing try increasingly unusual moves is moving. She was trying. It was the wrong approach, but she was trying, and that counted for something. What finally broke phase 3 was Gerald. Gerald, who had danced at our real wedding and cried 3 times, went home from that small ceremony and had, by his own later account, a conversation with Diane that lasted 4 hours and was unlike any conversation they had had in approximately a decade. Gerald is not a confrontational man, but Gerald is, it turns out, a man who had been waiting for someone to leave the door open, and Marcus standing up at a non-wedding and saying, "We're done for today," had opened it. He told Marcus, who told me, that he had told Diane, "I love you." And I have let things happen for years that I shouldn't have let happen, because it was easier than the alternative. But this, what you did at that wedding, and the way you've responded to it, this is not who I want to be married to. I'm not leaving. I'm asking you to choose to be different. And if you can't, I need you to know that the choice has consequences. Gerald, apparently, had been in therapy for 2 years. Nobody knew. He'd been going on Tuesday afternoons and telling Diane he had a standing golf game. I found this out and it made me feel 2 things simultaneously. 1, respect for Gerald's long game, and 2, grief that it had been necessary. Diane went to therapy 3 weeks later. She called Marcus to tell him. It was the first call he answered in a month. She didn't apologize on that call. That came later, and it was imperfect and partial, and she got defensive twice in the middle of it, but she finished it and she meant it. Marcus told me about it afterwards and said, "It wasn't enough, but it was real." I said that was a fair assessment. He said, "I think she's genuinely surprised that people have edges." I said, "Most people are, the first time they find out." Bethany, separately and without Diane's knowledge, messaged me 6 weeks after the ceremony. Her message said, "Hey, I know this is weird. I just wanted to say, watching everything happen, I realized I've been doing the same thing she does, just smaller. Like the opinions and the not asking. I don't want to be like that. I'm sorry I called you twice and didn't take sides. I was taking her side. I know that." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I said, "Thank you. That actually means a lot. Bethany and I get coffee now roughly once a month." She is, it turns out, quite funny, and has reasonably good taste in films and is struggling honestly with a career transition that she is approaching with more self-awareness than she previously applied to anything. She is trying. I root for her. Uncle Dennis, who had been reconsidering several things, moved out of his mother's house 4 months after the wedding that wasn't, and into an apartment with a friend from his early career. He texted Marcus on the day of the move. Sometimes you need a big thing to happen in someone else's family before you see the big things in your own. Congratulations on the wedding. Your wife is formidable. He did not define big things. He did not need to. The Kowalski twins were never identified. I have made peace with this. The caterer, who had been unexpectedly catering 122 people instead of 202 and still had food left over, donated the surplus to a shelter nearby. I sent them a thank you note and they sent back a response that said, "Weirdest wedding weekend we've ever had, but it worked out." I have this on my studio wall. And then there is the thing I did not expect. 3 months after everything, I got a call from a photographer, a well-established one, the kind with gallery shows and magazine credits, who had been a guest at the manor house, one of Diane's interlopers, as it happened, a colleague of someone who had been invited legitimately. She had watched everything unfold. She had seen me walk back into that room and speak to our guests and manage a situation that most people would have dissolved in. And then she'd asked Petra who I was, and Petra had given her my card. She called to offer me a collaboration, a documentary project about ceremonies, weddings, funerals, baptisms, the rituals humans make to mark time. She had funding. She wanted a co-photographer with a different eye. We have been working together for 8 months now. The project is, genuinely, the best work I have ever done. So, to recap, my mother-in-law's unauthorized guest list, her invoice to my father, and my father's decision to stand up at my wedding with a manila folder resulted through a chain of events that I could not have predicted and would not have chosen in the best professional opportunity of my career. I don't know what to do with that, philosophically. I have decided to simply be grateful and not examine it too closely. It is a Wednesday afternoon, and I am sitting in my studio, the one my father bought and handed me without telling me, and that I have been running for 5 years now with increasingly fewer accidental discoveries about who owns what, and I am editing photographs from a ceremony we shot last week. A small one. 14 guests. The couple had eloped, technically, in the legal sense, 6 months ago, and this gathering was a celebration after, the one that mattered to them emotionally rather than administratively. It was in someone's backyard. There were string lights, the dog was included in the photos. It was, without exaggeration, one of the most genuinely joyful events I have ever photographed. I am editing the photo of the dog looking directly at the camera during the couple's first dance, and I am laughing by myself in my studio, and this is my life now. And it is good. I think about the version of me from 14 months ago, who was redoing a seating chart for the 11th time in an Excel spreadsheet she called the War document, who was responding to emails at 11 p.m. about the Kowalski twins, who was having conversations that began, "I hear what you're saying, Diane, and I understand your perspective," and who was slowly, incrementally losing track of what she actually wanted the day to feel like because she had spent so long managing what everyone else wanted the day to feel like. I think about walking down that aisle and seeing my father in the third row with his manila folder, and how the feeling I had in that moment was not dread, but something closer, weirdly, genuinely, to relief. Like a storm that had been building for a very long time had finally broken, and at least now we could see what the ground looked like underneath. The ground, as it turned out, was pretty solid. My wedding lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds before the objection. My marriage, the real one, the small one, the one with 38 people in a restaurant garden and Petra crying behind her camera, is now approaching its first anniversary, and it is the most honest and uncomplicated relationship I have ever been in. Which I know sounds like a low bar given everything I've told you, but I promise it is not. Marcus is still making excellent soup. I am still making color-coded folders. We are figuring it out together, without an audience, in the way that most things worth doing require. My father framed the invoice. It is in his office. Visitors sometimes ask about it. He tells them it is a document of historical significance. He is not entirely wrong. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing that therapy and 8 months of reflection and one very excellent documentary photography project have brought me back to, again and again, is this. I was so busy being reasonable that I had stopped being honest. Not dishonest. Just not fully honest. I had been polishing every conversation, softening every pushback, finding the most diplomatic way to say the thing instead of just saying it, for so long that I had started to believe the diplomacy was the thing, that managing the situation gracefully was the goal. It took my father standing up in a manor house with a printed invoice to remind me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, for the person you're marrying, even for the people who've been behaving badly, is to let the situation be exactly what it is. Unpolished, clear, in the room. He did not yell. He did not accuse. He stood up and stated a fact and asked a question and sat back down. That was it. That was the whole thing. 4 sentences and a folder. Sometimes 4 sentences and a folder is everything. I learned one thing. Family isn't the people you were born with. It's the people who don't send invoices to your father without asking. Or who do, but only when it's funny and they're on your side. To the people in this thread who have sent me messages saying they recognized something in this story, something about being reasonable for too long, about organizing everyone else's comfort at the expense of your own clarity, I see you. I was you. The Excel spreadsheet full of compromises is not a personality. The careful emails are not a relationship. You are allowed to let the thing be what it is. The dog in the backyard wedding photo is named Gerald, by the way. The couple had named their dog Gerald 2 years before any of this happened. I did not tell them about Marcus's father. Some coincidences are just for you. Eta, I genuinely don't think so. My father might technically have disrupted a ceremony, but he had been invited to the ceremony and he was in possession of relevant financial documentation, and he raised a procedural question in an appropriate forum. He asked me last week if I wanted him to return the framed invoice. I told him to keep it. It looks good in his office. It has a very nice font. And honestly, Diane did put a lot of effort into it. It would be a shame to waste.